Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik and welcome to 2019. As the clock struck midnight, celebrations erupted all across the world. Fireworks and confetti filled the skies as people spent the hour with their loved ones looking forward to the new year. In light of this, we discuss today exactly how the world celebrates the beginning of a new year. While doing so, we also talk about how certain cultures and countries do not see January 1st as when the new year begins. Following from that, we will also discuss how consumer spending rises during the holiday season and what makes individuals think of a new year as a clean slate. We welcome to the show our guests. Thank you so much for joining us, Anna. Anna, so now there are a host of cultures and religions that celebrate the new year on different dates. Muslims observe the Islamic calendar that sees Muharram as the beginning of the new year. Many Indians see Diwali as ushering in the new year. Similarly, the Chinese culture begins the new year in February. There's a lot of intrigue surrounding the Chinese New Year. What can you tell us about that?
New Year. Well, usually China celebrates the New Year in a quite different way that, the other parts of the world we're used to. It's usually the 31st of December, and it's just supposed to be the big party of midnight. For China, and me personally, it's also more a party of being out in the street with friends. China is way more family-like. It usually happens in February, and it lasts for around 2 weeks. And everything is more about staying home with the family, just cleaning out the energies of the home to start over for the new year. So it's really, really different of what we're used to. It's not like the big party. It's more about being home and be with family and watch TV. They all watch the same TV show, which I have no idea what it's about. But it's this kind of TV show, but that's the Chinese New Year.
And how are events organized in China during these special days in the Chinese New Year, and also is the New Year in January celebrated?
Okay, so when it comes to I live in the big city of Beijing. I've been here already for 4 years. So let's talk about the Chinese New Year. People usually leave the big cities and they go to the village. So the city gets pretty dead. When it comes to the traditional New Year, which is the 31st of December, that's a totally different story. China doesn't celebrate this. Mostly Chinese people don't really do. Sometimes the work doesn't even give you the holiday, or the schools have classes. If you're lucky, they will give you the holiday. But it doesn't matter for the foreigner community, at least. All the city goes crazy. There is a lot of events organized for the evening with a New Year topic. And the city center gets crowded. The main fancy area with the clubs gets crowded. People love it to go out. The events that usually happen is like the live music events. That is what I personally like and I personally organize, which is the live music events. And the clubs has their first special DJs for the night. And that's how the city gets them. Because we cannot have the fireworks. Beijing cannot organize fireworks. So
we can talk about Chinese New Year as well. What are some of the main cultural foods that are brought out, traditions?
All right. In that sense, for the traditional year and the Chinese New Year, at least in the Beijing, in the south of China, everybody gets together to cook the jiaozi. That's the thing, which is this dumpling, the pork that usually inside has pork. So I know that's the traditional food, at least for Beijing. My teachers always organize is to make the jiaozi, and that's what really signifies this time. When it comes for the traditional New Year of the December, as I say, we're a foreigner community, and you're very lucky to meet people from all over the world. So everybody just really bring their own thing. Me as a Venezuelan, I make my Venezuelan dishes, and then my German friends or Arabic friends and so on, they bring their own dishes. It becomes really international. It's very special.
And in Venezuela, is it different than in China? What do you guys do there?
Oh, Venezuela is amazing. We cook the best food. No, I will say it's the best food. But for Venezuela, the Christmas is very familiar, and the New Year is more to spend it with friends. So we cook so much food for Christmas that we just keep all that food for the New Year. Something called hallacas. So during all December and January, we're just eating the hallacas, which is the Christmas dish. And that's the very thing, me as a Venezuelan, when we think about this time, is just about hallacas and these very special arepas we cook for this time. I did some for my friends this year. They love it. So
Anna, stay with us. We have to go to a short break. When we return, we're going to discuss this further. Welcome back to Indus Special. Let's discuss New Year's Eve further. We're joined by Omar Farouk, who's a marketing expert. Thank you so much for joining us, Omar. Omar, let's talk about the consumerism aspect of these holidays. How have you seen consumerism patterns changing over the years?
Thank you very much for inviting me, Meshal. As far as the markets and consumers are concerned, I have seen an upward trend. There are certain industries which grows with times. Consumer marketing on holidays is one of them. Because when you talk about consumerism and when you talk about events like New Year and the holidays which are associated with it, it's just a 10 days package, you know that. So people buy, people are always busy and they go to shopping malls, they go to marts and they do this barbecue activities, they exchange gifts and they buy chocolates and they pass on flowers.
But over here, we're talking about consumer trends having an upwards trajectory. That could be because of rising population, some would argue.
But these things are old, you know, exchanging gifts, sending flowers, and all these things. These are old traditions. Although the means are changed a bit, now we send electronic cards to each other. But buying chocolates, sending flowers, that remains the same.
And on the marketing end, how do retail outlets, marketing agencies design their campaigns, companies design their campaigns in order to ensure that their strategies get the highest number of sales?
All right. Strategy, basically, it's one activity to get the major objective. The objective is to get the maximum positive word of mouth. For example, if you generate one positive word of mouth, then it will go and reach to 20 people. Those 20 people will tell further 20 peoples, and those 20 people will tell more people. So that's how the circle is generated. And once the positive image is built, people always remember that before making a final decision.
But do people have time to remember stuff? There are so many options out there. How does a brand make sure that they are memorable, especially in the holiday season?
Yeah, you're right. That's a wonderful question. For example, there is a company who likes to associate itself with the New Year activity, for example, or some other event. So if you go and take a hall and you call few people and you call a stand-up comedian there and a witty person and a celebrity, the people invited there or the people who are watching all these things on TV, they keep this thing in their minds.
So it's association by a personality.
Yes, once not only the personality, the whole thing. The thing is, when people go and participate in these activities, they keep this thing in their mind. And when they go shopping and do all that stuff, they remember that this company has done this activity in a particular time.
So keeping in mind the global context where there is an economic crisis in many parts of the world, have marketing companies had to adopt a more aggressive approach towards selling their products, marketing their products? Yes,
they should, and they are doing it. The reason being, this is the time people should be acknowledged with the messages, you know. People should be, what is basically a brand concept is to create awareness about the brand. So people remember that this is where you call the brand recall. One thing you call top of the mind recall, that whenever you go and buy a certain brand, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? So this is where the market comes in. This is where the strategy comes in. And this is where the ATL, BTL, and 360 degrees marketing come in.
Hold on to that thought. I'd like to ask Anna a last question before she leaves us. Anna, what about discounts during the holiday season? Do you see mass sales?
Yeah, me and my people personally, we organized this lottery. So we gave away 5 VIP tickets for future events are going to happen. So we used the Christmas and the New Year excuse to give away these free tickets. Now 5 winners manage to go to any events we give them for, they can be like VIP guests. So we like to organize these kind of things, just give presents away to our customers, such as the free entrance, maybe some discounts for entrance of our shows, or maybe some merchandise, t-shirts, posters from the favorite bands.
What about online shopping? We've all obviously seen a trend that is moving upwards in terms of that. What happens during the holiday season there?
In the online shopping?
Yes.
Well, for my side, like everything is so important. Like everything we do is just online. Like all these, to spread all these discounts, to spread all, like there is no other media possible that is not by the online. In China, we use something called Weibo, which is basically a Twitter. And we really rely on our Weibo to just spread all this news and all these merchandise we like to sell, and especially our shows. A lot of the foreigner bands we bring here, they're not as big in China, so we really need to spread this to the Chinese people so they can buy our tickets. And this is, like, it couldn't be any other way that is online to make this happen.
Thank you so much, Anna, for joining us. It was great talking to you. Let's move back to Umar. So, Umar, there are a lot of deals that happen, but in some ways they might trick the consumer. So a survey found that almost many Americans were in, an average American was in $1,000 of debt after the holiday season. So as a marketing expert, what can you tell us about that? How do firms trick consumers into buying more?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. Actually, advertising and the corporations don't force people to buy something. They appeal them. See, this is their own choice. Nobody asks you or forced you to get money from your pocket. But again, the main thing is not, this is a short-term thing, earning and the profit making. The long-term thing is brand management.
But at the same time, just to mention here, there are time-sensitive deals that are promoted. And the logic behind that is if you don't capitalize on that then and there, you will lose that deal, whereas that might not be the case because sales are ongoing throughout the year, not just in the holiday season.
Yes, that's why people, basically, you are helping people in that regard. When you are offering them discount, you are basically asking them to upgrade their quality of life. Because this is their, for example, there is a product A which they can't buy in a normal time, but on these occasions, they offer you a discount. So that's where you give them an opportunity to buy a certain thing.
And how much of that idea is sold to upgrade the quality of life?
The idea is simple, that you keep on doing the research. That's what corporations do. And when they do research, they keep in mind the brand positioning. SECs, socio-economic classifications, for example, your education, your age, your gender. And they do this all the time. And then they look at the behavior of the people, then they introduce the product. So in one way or the other, they are basically helping to upgrade your lifestyle.
But you, trying to get to the bottom of this, how do they make sure, how do they entice the consumer to think that, yes, without this product, my life will not be the same? How do they convince them? Their marketing campaigns we mentioned earlier are very aggressive. How do they do that?
Meshal, that's a very good question. The reason being, the consumer is much aware now. For example, if a person like me, whenever we go to the market, we buy things after a complete research. I mean, if I want to buy something which is associated with eatery or the medicine or something organic, I'll go and buy something which is research-oriented. So this is where the company's research come in, you see. Before I make a decision to buy something, I go for a thing which is properly research-oriented. So basically, they are not forcing you to buy something. They are actually educating you to should you go for that or not.
So this, we're talking about adults who can research and then go out to buy, but now we are also seeing a lot of marketing tactics targeted towards children. And with the advent of social media and the television and how ads go on there, a lot of kids get this urge to buy a certain product. So how are marketers targeting certain products at children who can't do research?
They do. In fact, when you look at different TV channels, you see, for example, there is a TV channel which just shows the color patterns. This is where children are attracted. Cartoon is one thing where children are attracted. For example, Cartoon Network is one segment where children are attracted. This is where children actually tell their mothers and parents to buy a certain thing, and which is, again, dependent on the research and the product category.
So if you had to give advice to marketers out there for a successful marketing campaign during the holiday season, what would you tell them to do?
I'll ask them to do more research. First go study and what are the different trends going on in the market. Plus look at the brighter side if they are having an opportunity where they can help people in a sense that most campaigns which we see nowadays, they are donating a very major part of their campaign and earning to the poorer side of the society. So this is what you should keep in your mind before designing a campaign.
Umar, hold on to that thought. We'll continue that. We're also joined by Steve Keen, who's an economist, and Inar Tangen, who's an economist. Thank you so much for joining us. Steve, let's start off with you. So a phenomenon known as the Christmas creep is now becoming widely evident, where companies, firms, retailers start advertising products for Christmas even a month or two before. How is that changing the economy?
Well, it's always been the case. Christmas always comes earlier every year, basically. I mean, what we have is a range of social rituals that have been turned into marketing opportunities, and there's always a temptation for firms to market one day earlier.
And how does that what does that mean for the retail economy in general? So the NRF estimated that almost 585,000 retail employees will need to be hired in the US this year in order for higher sales. So following from that, how do you think an earlier marketing strategy, what it means for the economy at large?
Well, if you look at the level of retail sales over a whole year, almost 30% of them occur around Christmas time. So it's an incredibly important part of the activities of any retail company is to get as many Christmas sales as possible. Now, of course, you can't absurdly start to have Christmas sales the day after Christmas. So there's a limit to how far that can be pushed. But that's why there's such a pressure, such a desire by retailers to push Christmas further and further forward, because it is responsible for literally 30% of their sales.
Inar, moving on to you. So we're talking about the economy at large and the economic aspects of all these holidays. One of them is fireworks, and we're seeing so much expenditure by different governments into this. Now, one of the greatest things about fireworks are that they are a public good. What can you tell us about that? How important is having these public goods for the economy?
Well, I mean, it's all part of the Christmas and New Year's celebration. This is how you get people to down to areas where they're shopping. You make them feel that this is a very special occasion. As my colleague said, this is 30% of the year's retail. Now, remember, a lot of these fireworks and things like that are underwritten by corporations who are looking to either do civic goods or to use them as a way of advertising, or a little bit of both. So it works out both ways. But, you know, noticeably in the United States, in Indianapolis, they canceled the New Year's fireworks simply because it was too expensive. It'd be about $3 million, and they said that they had better ways to do that. So it all depends on the largesse of local corporations mostly, but it's not just the cost of the fireworks. You have to remember, somebody has to set them up, they have to clean them up. There's all sorts of, as people go down, there's parking lot fees, which can range anywhere between $10 and $25 to $50, depending on which city you're in. And then there are the snacks, dinners, a little bit of extra shopping, some hot chocolate. It starts to become a multi-trillion-dollar a year business just on the entertainment side. Think of how many hotel rooms out there around the world are being utilized as we speak.
So, Inar, it's very interesting that you mentioned how there were that fireworks were canceled because they were too expensive. In 2017, when we talk about the White House celebrating Christmas, it had almost 53 trees, a 350-pound cake, gingerbread house there. So how do you think the government celebrates these events in light of expenditure?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing to be the Grinch. Donald Trump has been trying to play that role this year by tweeting that he's home alone while everyone else is having a good time. But the fact is, you don't want to cancel Christmas. That doesn't look good. It makes you, as a politician, diminished. Most of them, politicians, love these holidays. It gives, for example, the president is able to give a Christmas speech to Fox News in this particular case. But around the world, Xi Jinping gave a very, very good speech where he talked about China's accomplishments, the hard road ahead, but how they intend to persevere and what goals they had in terms of society. So politicians love these. So it's doubtful that they'll ever cancel the Christmas cake, although in China, there was some blowback in terms of not trying to create this kind of excessive consumerism that has been associated with the Western ideas of celebrating. Remember, for China, Chinese New Year is going to come in February. It's not now, although they do celebrate the changing of the actual year here.
Steve, I'd like to take my next question to you following from something that Inar mentioned, which is excessive consumerism. How do you think marketing campaigns sell that idea to consumers?
Well, capitalism is all about marketing. So the whole idea of being excessive, I think, is an oxymoron. Economic theory tends to leave out the role of marketing in the belief that the abstractions they make to pretend that products are all homogenous and that therefore firms can only compete on price. In fact, products are diversified and firms compete on the diversity of products they offer rather than on just on price alone. And consumers don't know what products are being sold by firms. Marketing plays an essential role in the competitive war between firms. So there's excessive marketing is another term for capitalism.
So Steve, since you're from Sydney and an interesting thing took place there in terms of fireworks where they were supposed to be ticketed, and even the mayor claimed that that is not doing a great service to the people. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think public goods should be ticketed in that sense?
Well, I'd rather generate excessive carbon dioxide out of fireworks than out of coal-fired power stations. So there's something about humanity that enjoys the spectacle of lights and colour. And it's part of our humanity to enjoy that. If you go to see fireworks, unless you're an absolute Ebenezer Scrooge, you'll get an involuntary wow when you see a huge flash of lights. And this is partly how cities market themselves these days. New Year's Eve is a major marketing event for many cities around the world, and of course Sydney being the first major capital after the international date line. That's become a major way that Sydney sells itself to the rest of the world. So it's one of those investments in marketing, and every city tries to do it. Sydney happens to be number one for geographic reasons and also for the quality of its fireworks.
And Steve, it's very interesting that you also mentioned the environment here. So we're seeing a lot of environment movements all across the world, and yet fireworks are supposed to cause a lot of air pollution. How do people reconcile with those two ideas?
Don't ever pretend that humans are rational. For a start, that'll help you reconcile a lot more of reality than you do if you try to pretend that we're all rational profit maximizers and utility maximizers. But fundamentally, that's part of the celebration of being human. And I said I'd far rather have fireworks every day of the year, but no coal-fired power stations. It's really the base load where we generate the energy that our societies need that generates most of the pollution we have to cope with. And against that, a fireworks display is trivial compared to the carbon output of a coal-fired power station or of the cars we all drive in as internal combustion engines. So let's promote fireworks and shut down coal-fired power stations, move to solar power, and move away from internal combustion engines.
Inar, so a very interesting thing Steve mentioned here was consumers and individuals not being rational. So how does the economy, and especially in the holiday season, feed off irrational consumer behavior?
Well, that was really my point. Excessive consumerism is trying to convince people that they need things they certainly do not, whether it's toys that break easily or something that you really don't need. You don't need 5 back scratchers and things like this. This is my colleague has pointed out that people aren't rational. Then he says they should act rationally when it comes to climate change. I agree with all that. But taking advantage of people, this is a choice economy. Just think about it. I mean, right now we have two economies. There's the necessity, the things that you absolutely have to have, food, water, shelter, et cetera. Then you have, the economic buildup. You have to, if you're going to have people living together, you need sewers and water and roads and communications and things like that. Everything after that is about choice. Whether I buy a T-shirt for $1 or a designer T-shirt for $500, that is a choice. Now, yes, the free market says let it all roll. But in this time, there can be kind of a frenzy as these marketing firms and businesses try to stampede people into believing that they have to go out and buy things simply because this is what is expected of them, and if they're not good people and things like this. The fact is, this idea of Christmas as being this benevolent kind of thing is relatively new. It was really developed by Dickens. The Christmas Carol all of a sudden made Christmas into a family event, and therefore there should be turkeys and Christmas gifts. Prior to that, it was generally about bad little boys and girls would get either, they'd be taken away by some monster or be visited in some sort of terrible, frightening way.
And I'm also very interested into trying to understand how marketing strategies are becoming more aggressive over the years and making people believe in this dream of, a consumer utopia where you have all the products you could possibly desire and you have to work towards them.
Yeah, but the fact is, the people who have more things aren't happy. Generally, when you have more things, you're unhappy, and then you just buy more stuff. I mean, if your 65-foot yacht is not big enough, you need 165-foot, and if that's not big enough, you need 300. And it's about bragging rights and status and things like this. And there's a lot of comparison, not only in the United States, but in China and everywhere else. Face matters, how you project yourself. And this is used by advertisers in ways that are not productive for society. I would think it would be far better if we would go along with my colleagues' goals of doing something for the environment. I don't know necessarily think you have to have fireworks every day. I don't know that vets returning from wars are necessarily appreciated. But yes, this is something that most people enjoy. But these holidays should be balanced somewhat by the ideas that are supposed to be there, which is, it's not what you receive, it's what you give. And it's not just giving to those giving to society, being thankful that, you have a roof.
And now hold on to that thought. I'd like to bring Omar back into this conversation. Omar, how is the idea of happiness sold and marketed when there are certain products which might not be productive for society? How are they sold?
For example, today is a new year, day one, right? So we are organizing an event here. There is a big hall, people are gathered here, there is a stand-up comedian there who is making people laugh, and people are basically here for fun, because everybody loves fun. So anything that makes people happy, they remember that. So whenever the next time they go to shop something or they go and buy something, they will keep that thing in their mind, that company actually was associated with this event, and that caused them some few happy moments. So this happiness actually is in the back of their minds before they make the final decision. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. Steve, I'll take the conversation back to you. So we are seeing how there are economic crises, especially in Europe, and we're also seeing how after Brexit, it was expected that retail sales would drop, but in 2016, in the fourth quarter, there was almost a 6% higher spending rate by consumers. How is the economy changing amidst all these crises, and then we are seeing consumer behavior? It just doesn't make sense. Can you tell us a little about it?
Well, traditional economics ignores the role of credit in financing expenditure, which is an incredible omission in mainstream thinking. And what has actually happened in the background is that while economists are obsessed about the level of government debt, they've ignored rising levels of private debt. And those private debt levels have got so high now that, first of all, credit demand is a major part of people's capacity to spend. But secondly, the accumulated credit, which is the level of outstanding private debt, is so high that that's now slowing down how fast people want to spend. So we've got ourselves caught in quite a trap of too much private debt and too much of a reliance upon credit. And the only way out of that is to write that debt off. Now, that's not about to happen. We have such a defence of creditors' rights and such a minor level of rights for debtors these days that we think you can't allow people to get out of debts by writing them off. And in fact, that's got us trapped in a recession, not so much a recession, but a period of returning small rises in growth and then a slump again, like Japan has been doing for 25 years. So that is our real major problem, and that's simply not on the radar of conventional economists. So I think that's what's going to leave us with the reason that spending fluctuates dramatically depending upon people's willingness to get into debt. And as soon as rates go up too high, as is happening right now in America, I think we'll see a fall in people's capacity to take on new debt, a fall in credit-based demand, and a recession, which will catch all the policymakers by surprise, as unfortunately has been happening now for the last 30 years.
That's a very interesting point there, Steve. And now I'll take the conversation to you. So we were talking about how consumerism leads to debt. And of course, there's another aspect to people who run out of money, which is people who don't have money to begin with, poverty that exists for so many people in the world. So on one hand, consumerism exists for the consumer, but what is the government's role in these countries that spend so much on the holiday season?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, in the West, in any kind of liberal, democratic, capitalist society, they say, no, the government is hands off, basically lead the charge. We want to see a lot of economic activity that creates jobs. It puts more money into the system, the economic multiplier, et cetera. There's very little that's done in terms of the moral side of this. I mean, presidents in the past, Jimmy Carter and Obama also, they would make a definite show of going and helping those in need during this time, trying to lead by example in terms of creating a moral background. I think Donald Trump would have preferred to play golf. I don't know if that's necessarily qualifies as something helping out the poor. But you look on that side, and then you look in a place like China, where they've actually said, no, morally, this is not the way to go. This excessiveness, going into debt for things that you either want to give to others or to have yourself, is just nonsensical, and I think they look at it from a rational basis. And I think that is part of the role of government to kind of provide some leadership, whether it's by example or by preaching. I think a little bit of each is sometimes necessary.
So do you think that in order for individuals to be mobilized in a way to help people out on the streets, the role needs to be adopted by the governments?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, leadership is about, in my opinion, it's about leadership by example. If you're not willing to do it, how can you possibly expect other people to do it? So, I mean, yes.
Sorry, Anar, for cutting you off there, but in an instance when you also mentioned Trump being not being interested in what's happening, preferring to play golf, what can community leaders do? What can individuals do in order to give more attention to these causes?
Well, they can actually do it. They can. I would myself and my children would go out and on Christmas and Thanksgiving, and we would help out at homeless shelters, serve food, do whatever is necessary. In addition to having our own family events, we just tried to do that. I was a politician at that time. I think most of the people I know and admire did exactly the same thing. Those who huddled, in vacation places far from the hoi polloi, the downtrodden, and just wanted to forget and have a good thing. Yes, that's their right to do that. I don't hold it against them, but I don't think it's being responsible.
No, but also in this instance, it's important to remember the capitalist system and how it makes individuals compete for their money. They want to keep everything in their pockets. So how do you think capitalism has made people so obsessed with a certain lifestyle that they aren't willing to share or give anything up?
Well,
has it changed in the recent years?
I'm just saying that if you go back to Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, which was acknowledged by many to be one of the seminal works in describing capitalism, he was also very clear that capitalism does not work without a moral component. If you're simply chasing dollars and things like that, regardless of the human costs, you become a monster. You do not become more human. So this aspect that somehow money rules everything and the market is a magically evens out everything is nonsense. We've seen that. People are greedy, given they do not accept their social responsibilities. You have catastrophes, as we continue to have. And as my colleague indicates, and I agree with, we are probably due for another recession, specifically for these kinds of reasons. Not only personal debt, but corporate debt is at an all-time high, and the ability to repay it back is soon going to be diminishing as rates rise.
I'd like to take Steve on the same point here. So, Steve, how do you think greed is going to ruin the economy, ruin societies?
Well, I think we have a distorted picture of the role of greed in society. The whole idea that greed is good, as again my colleague has said, that Adam Smith, as well as talking about the wealth of nations, also talked the theory of moral sentiments and the need to have regard for each other, the cooperative side of our natures, which is an essential part of being human. And economic theory, making what I call the simplifying assumption, left out the fact that we have a regard for each other and pretended we're all totally self-interested. Now, I know they can distort their paradigm to make it look like it copes with the desire to be generous and so on, but I think that's absolutely a fallacy in how they've done it. So we have to look at the role of cooperation as well as the role of competition to understand our position on the planet. And when we focus upon greed alone, we actually amplify people's practice of greed. There's a whole area called public choice theory, which implied that people who work in public service are there for their own aggrandizement. And if you know genuine quality public servants, and they were much commoner in the past than they are now, literally because of this feedback effect, they are actually there with an idea of doing the public good. And that is an essential part of our humanity. So we need to acknowledge that, not just in our own behaviour, but also in our theory of how the economy functions.
Steve, and on the point of humanity, we're talking a lot about corporate culture, but in terms of government's role, we see homelessness rising. Why aren't governments investing greater into that? And I want to understand this in light of the capitalist system at large. Does this mean that your investment is wasted if you're investing it in people who cannot support the system?
I think it's governments again mistaken their own role. Again, economic theory pretends that governments are like households who have to save before they can spend. In fact, governments are money creators, and they can spend without limit in their own currency, but not without consequences. Now, what has happened instead is they're not spending sufficiently, and that's where part of the homelessness has come from. But there's also a tendency in capitalism to replace labour with machinery. Well, as soon as we can do something using a machine, which has much larger capacities of energy to draw upon than humans have, we do so, and we tend to displace workers that way. So we have a set of trends which are often fought by the capacity of workers to fight back for a share of what's being produced, and we've weakened that by weakening trade unions over time. So a huge part of this has been an increase in inequality, which is not a necessary part of capitalism. It was something which has been caused by the way in which we try to understand it, which is based on a set of fallacies. So government should be doing more to prevent homelessness. I remember a remarkable documentary with a group of Solomon Islanders coming to Sydney, supposedly to be educated about capitalism, and being so stunned by seeing homelessness that they organised a charity to raise money for homeless people in Sydney when they came from a village community back on the Solomon Islands. We need to get that level of humanity back and not to accept things like homelessness in the way that we've allowed ourselves to do.
Omar, now we're talking a lot about corporate culture, government's role, and we're seeing that there is an awareness amongst people realizing that they don't need all these products. So do you think there is enough awareness that can battle all these marketing strategies?
Yes, there is definitely awareness. People are really aware, and the advertisers, they are people like you and they are people like me. In fact, they, when they do research, they just read the trends people are after. That's how they introduce the product in the market. That product is definitely dependent on the current trends in the market and the behavior of the people. As far as the quality of life is concerned, these people have actually provided you a better quality, in a sense that your car is a different shape now, your brushing skills, your clothing, your other things, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, these things have upgraded. Your pain has been controlled by medicines, your life expectancy has been increased. This is all research-based, and corporations definitely invest a lot in these things. And when they invest in these things, people buy these things because, again, people are more aware to these things. And when they buy these things, these corporations generate income for their respective governments. And when the government earn this, they spend that money on people's welfare. Yeah.
Inar, how do you think consumerism, not consumerism, but the holiday season, we witness inequalities more than ever?
Well, I think we're more aware of it. Inequality is always out there. I would disagree with one point. I mean, government can do so much, but the individual also has to chip in. It's a kind of a halfway type of thing. You can't just simply lay down on the sidewalk and say, I'm poor, somebody has to take care of me. You have to be willing to work. You have to be willing to contribute to society. I mean, rights and responsibilities are two parts of one coin. I mean, it's just two sides. You can't have one without the other. So this idea that you just invest in homeless people is not the issue. You're investing in human beings who can be productive members of society, hopefully. If they can't, then I don't know that the government has the responsibility of just keeping somebody alive because they simply don't want to do anything and they believe that everybody else should support them. So there are limits to all of these things. In terms of being aware of the disparities during the holidays, yes, you should be. And as I said, if you feel, and as Steve said, if there's a cooperative element in our society that is necessary for it to function, and that is, unfortunately, seems to be disappearing in direct proportion to the decline of the middle class. I mean, one of the issues that we're dealing with worldwide right now is the decline of the middle class in Europe and the United States, which is interesting given that 2/3 of the world's profits over the last 20 years have been flowing into where? The United States and Europe. So although the number of jobs has gone down, so has the middle class. So the income disparity is there. Whereas in the East, you're starting to see a rising middle class in both India and China. It's not necessarily solving anything, but it's certainly more likely to stabilize their societies than one where it's in decline. And that explains a lot of reasons why people are willing to support kind of opportunistic individuals who promise everything and can deliver very little.
Inar, I'd like to move on into discussing a little more about the human psyche behind New Year's Eve. Many people perceive New Year's Eve as starting a new time capsule of sorts where they make New Year's resolutions. What makes people think that this is not a continuation of the previous year, but something new entirely?
For exactly the reason you said. If the previous year was not so good, they want to put it behind them, this kind of fresh start mentality. I think it's more prevalent in the West than it is in the East. I mean, in America, it's a land of you can be bankrupt 5 times and still be president. But in the East, it's very different. I know in China, it took me a while to get used to this idea. It doesn't matter if you're incompetent or unlucky, because quite frankly, no one's interested in anybody who's unlucky or incompetent. So they take a very hardline view of this, and the past is never really dead. You hope for the future, and I think that's part of the human condition, to want better, not only for yourself, but for your children and your grandchildren and those around you and your friends. So it's a time of renewal. It coincides with the new year. I mean, you go back to ancient times, all of these were part of the winter solstice celebrations, one way or another, closely linked. And it's the idea that the sun is going to start getting warmer, and then you can plant crops. And hopefully the new year will bring in enough so that there's not only plenty to eat at the next Christmas, but maybe a little left over to store away for potentially hard times to come.
Thank you for that comment. I'll take the same point to Steve. Steve, so Anar mentioned something of the American dream, helping people, forcing people to think of the new year as being a fresh start. Do you think of that in the same light, in the same way?
So I do. The mention of the winter solstice is extremely important because all these part of the cycle of the planet, and since we've had agricultural societies, we've had people having ceremonies around the winter solstice because that's the point where you start coming back into the growing season, and you're basically trying to tame the gods of the sky, and in that sense, that's a page that goes back at least 10,000 years. That's an essential element of human society, which has been commandeered by capitalism and made into an event for the new year, where, of course, most of us no longer have any link to the land. So it becomes a commercial cycle rather than the agricultural one it once was. But that's, again, essential part of our psyche. And a lot of these things have been distorted by the society we're in. We denigrate New Year's these days. We talk about Christmas as being excessively consumerist. In fact, these were of gift giving in Asian societies, and that's again being exploited and perverted in some ways by capitalism. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that that was part of our essential humanity, which was sharing gifts with each other and giving, and also hoping for a good start for the new growing season.
Thank you for that comment. Umar, I'll take the last point to you. On the same point, do you think that human psyche changes with the switch of the date, changing the year?
Yes, it does, in fact, Meshal. The thing is, New Year is all about resolutions, little promises you make to yourself, that I will keep on doing that. So this is one bad thing, I'm not going to adopt it for another year, and this is what I'm going to do next year. The same way companies do the same thing. For example, you see an ad into the newspaper where a shopping mall or other...
Even though it's just a minute change in the date, people take it that seriously.
Yes, they do. In fact, when you say Happy New Year to you, that's where the whole thing comes in, you know. When you tell people, each other, that I am going to make promise to myself that I am going to do this thing in 2019, that I am going to lose my weight, I am doing that thing. So the next day is a new day for you, for the rest of your life.
Thank you so much. On that note, Umar Farooq, we'd like to end. Thank you, Anar, for joining us. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. We hope all our viewers enjoy the holiday season. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.